Hi guys, welcome to the Not Quite Daily Show, episode number 8 of our winter 2018 season, talking about Darling in the Franxx. Today we're going to be analyzing episode 8, and we're going to... Oh. Okay then. Wait, no. There's actually plenty to talk about. I did say last time that the beach served the purpose of getting the parasites in less clothing in an exotic and exciting locale, ramping up our sexual tension. Well, time to ratchet that up one step further. I lamented last time about the one-sided use of male gaze, and I wasn't that keen on the inequality or the implication. Well, this time the guys got a whole episode to face the consequences of an unwanted ogling. So, in a way, this is a continuation of last episode. Now maybe you thought I was crazy for making The Team Is Not a Team an ongoing conflict a few episodes ago, but this is just the kind of falling out we've had brewing, and I would guess that it's not the last. But this one is definitely one of the most universal and relatable of all conflicts, boys versus girls. Our episode begins with our 13er squad fighting a Klaxosaur, one that we haven't yet seen. Forget about the outcome of this battle for a moment. This is actually a huge leap in progression. Until now, every Klaxosaur encounter has been a big bit to do. The Moho-class T-Rex thing that seems to threaten the entire plantation, the Conrad-class Ticks and the Worm thing are missions that take up a good chunk of the episode and nearly cost us some of the squad, and then the Target Beta threat is a looming danger for nearly 2 episodes, requires 2 squads and all kinds of resources from both plantations, and still is nearly a lost cause with dead pilots. And now, we skip over all the build-up, mission briefing, loadout, travel time, and apparently a lot of the fight, and join the parasites fighting a Klaxosaur like it's just another day at the office. It's almost an aside, almost casual. Were it not for the costume malfunction that it initiates, this fight wouldn't be worth putting in the episode at all. What a huge departure from every other conflict we've seen up until now. Now, the Klaxosaurs may be this looming, unknown, existential threat, but they have been relegated almost to a sideshow here. And I'm sure there's still massive ones and world-destroying herds and other threats coming down the line, but look how nonchalantly their supposed mortal enemy is being treated at this point. Can there be any doubt that this show is about something besides robots fighting monsters? Anyway, the squad fights with relative coordination, including Strelizia, so we seem to have come a long way. In fact, once we see the interior, we will discover that Zero Two's combat suit has changed to the same style as the rest of the squad, rather than the Asuka-esque red one that we've seen until now. I know that makes sense due to her official membership, but it's only in combat wear that she is dressed the same as everyone else. As we'll see in the rest of the episode, she still has her old civilian clothes. It seems she is a part of the group when it comes to being a Franxx pistol, but still an outsider when it comes to being a fellow parasite. Now as for the progression of the scene, I confess that when we got sprayed with gunk, I was really worried that we were taking our analogies too far. Like, I was expecting we might have a conversation about reproduction during this episode because of the pamphlet Kokoro took last time, so I was like, time out, time out. But no, it seems more like our parasites are metaphorically bathed in hormones at this point in their lives, and narratively, the stuff burns through clothing but not skin. So it seems much more like a literary device than a substance that would actually exist. For the first time in the series, the overtly sexual posing of the girls while piloting actually serves a narrative purpose, as they are in no position to notice what is happening, and the guys are in no position to miss what is happening. And depending on how far it's spread, this is more than just a little compromising. The girls' nearly episode-length anger and embarrassment seems way more justified than the usual lucky pervert trope that makes male characters into unwitting voyeurs or gropers. The pot was set to simmering last episode, but this is boiling way, way over. Might as well point out, though, that the team that recovered and was able to still act was Hero and Zero Two, and likewise, he was the only guy that owned up to what was going on. It's another way of representing that their relationship is a step or two ahead of everyone else's. Now, this incident directs the rest of the episode, and so the boys versus girls theme will get this video's attention. Before we get into that, though, let's talk about a couple of world-building things from this scene. The first is something we wondered before, but don't have to wonder now. The girls' senses really are connected to the Franxx. Each of them is expecting pain when they are sprayed, but there is none. I suppose then that if it was some other kind of acid or other solvent that hurt the Franxx, then the girls themselves would have felt pain. Later on in the episode, the guys will comment on how it's their frail bodies that bear the brunt of the battle, which more or less confirms this. They also don't seem to feel the contact with their skin or feel their suits burning away. And when they realize they are being exposed, they react in an instinctual covering themselves pose, but it's actually the Franxx that move and try to cover up, which of course doesn't help at all. So I'm guessing that as long as they're connected, any way they attempt to move does not move their own bodies, but the Franxx instead. And likewise for their sensory input. They don't feel anything happening to their actual bodies, only to the Franxx. The second thing to talk about is... okay, let's talk a little more about klaxosaurs. Now this is not really speculation, because we don't know enough. It's more like wild guessing, or at least pointing out some things that could prompt some wild guessing. Now, we don't yet know the origin of the klaxosaurs. Hiro said something last time that suggested that maybe humanity started mining for magma energy, and they came up to plague mankind because of that. Mitsuru told us the official story is that mankind holed up in the plantations in order to be protected from the klaxosaurs. And then we had the abandoned city, whose state suggested that it was abandoned all at once. Put all that together, and it seems that the klaxosaur threat and the response to it happened very quickly. It was not a gradual escalation of hostilities. So now let's look at their nature. Both of those ideas, Hiro's and the official story, suggest that the klaxosaurs are some different species or something in competition with humanity. But, and I said this last time, but do these things seem like they could be wholly biological? Their silhouettes and locomotion mimic members of the animal kingdom, but outside of that, they seem totally like machines. The way they can reconfigure themselves, the production of light and energy, the way they seem to collapse into liquid when their cores are destroyed, leaving no bones or organs or any other structure we would associate with a living thing. These seem way more like artificial beings. Their blood seems more like some infinitely transmutable substance that can form whatever they need it to be, and their cores the thing that controls that transmutation and keeps them whole. Destroy that, and they collapse into that original substance. In other words, like I've said, they seem more like technology run amok. Alright, maybe they are that. What are they supposed to be before running amok? To guess at that, let's look at the qualities we've seen so far. The first one, the Moho class T-Rex thing, could generate and aim a large blast of energy. The next, the Conrad class little ticks, could suck up magma and move through small spaces and work as a herd. After that, we had the huge worm that could burrow and tunnel great distances. And then we saw target Beta, which could transform into a battering ram and deliver great crushing power with accuracy. Finally, this time, we saw this garden sprinkler looking thing, which can excrete some kind of solvent that is selective about what it dissolves. Okay, so we know humanity mines magma, klaxosaurs are drawn to magma mining, and it kind of seems like the mining of magma came first. So, does anyone else see where klaxosaurs could basically be mining equipment? The T-Rex is like a portable dynamite blast, the ticks can collect magma and move independently through small spaces, the worm is like a boring, tunneling drill, target Beta can cave in or crush huge areas, and now this new thing can melt some substances while sparing others. Those all sound like pretty useful abilities if you were trying to work through layers and layers of rock types deep in the earth to get the magma out. I mean, the inner layers of the earth are not exactly conducive to living things. It would be much better to design such equipment to be able to direct its own movements and have some measure of independent decision making. So, is this an impossible scenario? That humanity decided to mine the earth itself for energy, designed this whole system of resilient, diverse, and independent machines to aid the process, and then lost control of their creations? And since humanity didn't stop mining magma, and the runaway machines were designed to seek magma out, the two of them continually come into conflict. Again, this is wild guessing, and this episode is definitely not about Klaxosaurs, so we'll stop there. But you might as well know what kind of questions I'm asking myself as I think about what to speculate about this largely unknown threat. After the credits, we see the Franxx being cleaned and the girls covered in blankets to hide their damaged uniforms. Except 02, it's worth pointing out, and they do not look very happy. Now Goro tries to placate the girls with logic, which probably still wouldn't work when they're this angry, but it's definitely a bust when Futoshi is dumb enough to be honest. It doesn't matter how you felt about the way she looked, dude, if she didn't want you to look. Then, Zotome doubles down on the dumb, dismissing their feelings at being seen. That's definitely further away from a good idea. Finally, Hiro tries his own hand, appealing to what I guess he feels is higher authority on the matter, and quotes 02. I guess he figured one girl's opinion would just be accepted by all other girls. It seems everyone has a lot to learn. And this fight is just the beginning of their realization that boys and girls think differently and value differently, and that this difference can lead to conflict. Now, puberty and young adulthood is an insanely confusing time in one's life, even if you aren't required to defend your civilization from blue monsters. Figuring themselves out and how to deal with this difference may take some time, maybe even a whole episode. Anyway, the embarrassment and loss of trust the girls feel is high as they all shower together and Miku rages. I hope no one misses the irony of having the girls express disgust and resentment about being seen without their permission, while the audience watches them take a shower together. This scene does at least showcase the characterization work the series has done to this point. Each of the girls' reactions and statements are in line with what we understand about their character. Miku is all emotion and aggression, Ikuno is calmly dismissive, Ichigo is worried about her team's morale, 02 is an outsider and therefore not present, and Kokoro is trying to be placating. Even though Kokoro is clearly embarrassed, maybe even more so than the rest, she is trying, even from the outset, to keep the others from escalating. There's a minor character arc for her in this episode, actually, starting from here and ending with her speech that causes Miku to run away, so we'll take note of it as we go along. Next, we have Miku laying down the law about their house divided. Even in this scene, you can see the three girls that are angry and resolute, but Kokoro is uncertain and worried. Absent from the scene and the conflict is 02, even though Hiro is there. As I said, she is still in her old civilian clothing, and likewise in her citizen role in the house, she is not really one of them. I think partially this is that she's older and has long since gone through this stage, and partially that she will take some time to really fit in. She's an old hand at Franxx combat, a world they are new at and just starting to figure out, but she is the newcomer to their social group and maybe healthy socialization in general. In both cases, she stands out. As I said last time, she is only just starting to edge into the group, and this episode has a little of that as well, but she's still well outside the circle. We once again have adults play the role of exposition and narration, and it looks like Dr. Franxx will be joining us in this for now. By the way, doesn't it look like he's studying blood patterns in the background there? Doesn't that look like what they showed for Heroes back in episode 5? Anyway, the information the adults give us is enlightening in its own respect, but I find it particularly interesting because it jives so much with some of the things we've noticed and predicted to this point. They're discussing puberty and its occurrence within squads, and evidently it's usually only one or two at a time, but this time it's practically everyone. Nana and Hachi seem concerned. This is out of the ordinary, it's unprecedented and unknown, but of course, that just means Dr. Franxx finds it all the more intriguing. Then Nana says something that I find all the more intriguing. If we go by Ape's manual, we should intervene and resolve the issue immediately. Okay, any guesses on how someone intervenes or resolves something like puberty? Are we talking sex ed courses, quarantine, or transfer? Or something a little more invasive? I mean, it's not like puberty suddenly started this week, right? The girls for sure all have the hip to waist thing going on, so this is not a brand new development. Well, we don't get any real details on what it would mean. But we do have the doctor dismiss Ape's usual playbook as he says, what would be the point of this test team if we did that? He wants them just to observe and report, finishing by saying, don't you dare interfere or let the geezers know. So, yeah, we've done a lot of speculating so far about sexual themes, the parasite's seeming naivete, the belief that this ignorance was intentional on the part of the adults, that there might be an infertility problem in this world, and that the Franxx experiments are related to that. And there's all the flower and other reproductive symbolism tied into this. And here we have Dr. Franxx himself insinuating that part of the purpose of this test team is related to them going through puberty, which is probably another way of saying that the purpose of this team is related to sexuality and/or reproduction. And then we have his instructions to keep it secret from the Ape Council and to let nature run its course without the two of them interfering. I said last time I suspected that whatever the Doctor was up to with our 13ers, it was going to be in conflict with the Council, and here we are. All but confirming that some of what makes this team a test team has to do with pursuing an agenda that is different from apes. Yeah, there's some real characterization work throughout this episode and a little bit of theme advancement, but this conversation with Dr. Franxx is probably my biggest takeaway. It really makes me think we're on the right track with the theme patterns we've noticed, and a lot of our ongoing speculation looks reinforced as well. So, that's cool. You know what's not cool? Some arbitrary tape separating 02 from her man, Hero. I feel like an echo at this point, but her quite literally stepping over a line the girls have drawn is a not-so-subtle reminder that she is an outsider to the group. It's like the boys and girls are on each side of this line, arguing about who's right, while she's like, yeah, that's cool, but the boys are over here, so I'll see you. She even does this endearing little skip with her hands behind her back as she gets closer to Hero. Again, this seems to be about where she is in life versus the other girls. Puberty might make the genders interested in each other in new ways, but it also divides them for a bit at first, as differences often divide people. After this novelty and strangeness wears off, though, you like being with the other sex, and the notion of segregation seems like passing silliness. This is 02 at the breakfast table all over again. I have no idea what the actual age spread is here, but I've always got the impression that she is older than the rest. If she had a boys are strange and icky period, it's well behind her now. Of course, still being in that period, the girls don't look to her as a model for their behavior, but a deviant that needs to be reined in. So they set out to do just this, and instead behold a great horror. Some mighty whitey tighties. The shock of this seems to derail their plan for 02, for the moment at least. Isn't it interesting that this started because the guys saw the girls not fully dressed and they felt put out? Now it's the guys who are not fully dressed and they still feel put out. And the guys knew that they would be, as in the next scene, Ichigo and Ikuno correctly guessed that they did it to provoke them, and that it was probably Goro's idea, as the other two couldn't have thought of it. So I guess Futoshi and Zotome haven't really blown anyone away with their smarts. Now, it really is just these three, Goro, Futoshi, and Zotome. They're really the only guys that were invested in this fight. The girls claimed the bathing space, and Goro decided to highlight that there might be some unintended consequences to such a thing. Reinforcing his notion is that the girls are now stuck doing all the cleaning for the bath. Though Miku complains about the unfairness of it, they all at least realize that they did bring this one-sided cleaning detail on themselves. We do get an interesting world-building detail out of it though. The parasites have to do their own cleaning, but the food and laundry is taken care of by invisible caretakers. I figured before now that there was simply no point in showing the adults that looked after the place, that either Nana was somehow part of it, or it just didn't matter, so why waste time showing housekeepers or caterers or whatever. Stopping to point out though that they have invisible caretakers seems non-trivial. It means the sequestering of the parasites away from adults is pretty thorough, and great care has been taken to keep them from interacting with anyone besides Nana and Hachi and now Dr. Franxx. I think we can assume now that the reason the parasites were largely unsurprised to find fire and food waiting for them last time is that it happens all the time. Of course, this all assumes that these are actual people that are performing these tasks. It could be something else, like kids that didn't make the parasite cut, or some kind of automation or other tech that would spoil the natural thing they are going for with Squad 13. I don't really have any idea, but there would be no reason to point it out if it was meaningless, so we'll keep an ear out. Anyway, Goro continues his campaign to show the girls the consequences of their action as the guys take over the dinner hall. His lackeys are hamming up the deliciousness of the food, but Hiro seems pretty uncertain about the whole affair. I guess since his partner doesn't care about the division, he has less at stake than the others. He's also the only guy that's not in the doghouse, but he isn't necessarily happy with the situation. Now Miku thinks it's unfair, and Goro agrees, and offers to forget the rules and invite the girls in. Miku, being the most impulsive of the girls, is all but ready to drop her ideals for something scrumptious. The rest won't be swayed so easily and drag her away. This becomes especially hard for her to bear when 02 walks up, says nothing, and nonchalantly crosses the line to get her own share of the tender victuals. So, our guys have tried rationalizing their behavior at the beginning of the episode, with no success. Now they've tried to show the downside to the house divided a couple of times, with no success. Though luring with food, that almost worked. What will they try next time? I'm sure they're hoping the girls will come to their senses, as they see it, which is why it's not so surprising that they get tricked later on. 02 will be this trickster, though all we get from the following scene is that 02 isn't worried about the situation the way Hiro is. In fact, she thinks it could use a little spicing up. It will be a moment before we get to see what this mischievous streak of hers entails. In the meantime, let's take an intermission. Kokoro is filling up a watering can and sighing to herself. She's troubled by the ongoing fight, but she feels powerless to affect it. Some time alone with her thoughts might be just the ticket, and she goes out to the greenhouse. She runs into Mitsuru, just like before. Both of them seem to treat this greenhouse as a place where they can have some privacy. He has the pills he's taken in his hand, but quickly hides them, while she has the maternity book in her hand, but quickly hides it. Yet, each of them ran into the other here before. There had to be some expectation that this might happen again. Now Kokoro plays it off nicely, asking if he's interested in the plants, but Mitsuru doesn't mind admitting that he comes here to be alone. She doesn't let this lack of interest stop her, though, and starts to tell him about her permission to care for the greenhouse, raising things up from seeds. This caretaker role is really just an extension of her nurturing personality. She then tells him a few examples of the language of flowers. This is probably something that will come up again sometime with all of our flower imagery, but I suppose we should note that neither of the plants she mentions match any of our Franxx names, and both are associated with warmer climates, which it seems that we are in. Now, the language of flowers is cool and all, but it's one of those things where different cultures assign different meanings, so there's not some universal thing flowers each mean. But, since we didn't get any direct links to our known Franxx, why don't I tell you at least something they could mean? That's what we do on this show, right? Now I found a flower meaning guide that seemed to match the three meanings that we get this episode, so I thought it has a good chance to be consistent with what our writers were thinking. For Strelitzia, there's the bird of paradise, which is a symbol of faithfulness. For Delphinium, we get an open heart. Argentea gives us affection but also silliness. It also comes from the word for burning, which seems to apply to our two pilots as well. Genista gives us humility or neatness, which fits Kokoro just fine. Chlorophytum, well, spider plants are the common terms for the members of this genus, but they are known for their leaves, not their flowers, and I couldn't find any meaning associated with the common members. That is, until I dug deeper and realized that they share some classification with lilies at the superorder level. And the flowers of the most common variety of spider plant do actually look like tiny little lilies. So, like a secret lily? A low-key lily? What does that have to do with anything? Well, we'll talk more about lilies in a moment, and then all will be made clear. Getting back to our scene, Kokoro wants to know if he isn't bothered by the two of them speaking. She is feeling out his stance on the boys versus girls issue. He thinks it's stupid and doesn't care. Well, he seems to feel that way about a lot of things, but Kokoro finds it to be pretty cool, telling him that it takes a lot of courage to refuse to toe the line, and she admits bashfully that she was too scared to speak up. We've been noticing that throughout, and it seems Kokoro is pretty self-aware. Mitsuru chooses to say nothing, and will leave her to it, and in standing, the hastily hidden maternity book falls out of its hiding place. Mitsuru recognizes it, infers that she took it from the Lost City, but then decides to express no further interest in it, and kind of plays it off. Now, this isn't exactly the first interaction between these two, and I want to talk about them more. Not here, though. I chatted with a few of you about this in the comments last time, so you probably know what's coming, but I'll see the rest of you in speculation, where I'll theorize a bit on our greenhouse denizens. Returning to our boarding house, we discover the girls have been reduced to scavenging rations and combing the building for sustenance. This leads to a floor they've never explored. Man, they really aren't very curious, are they? We see the closed-off rooms with keep-out tape, setting them up to enter the story later. Now, the futility of their search makes Ichigo reflect on the situation, and she wonders how long it can go on. Ikuno decides to chime in that she wouldn't mind if things stayed this way forever. Before she can be questioned on the statement, though, 02 teleports behind her, apparently, and licks her, declaring that she tastes a secret. I'm not sure she is making much progress at integrating with the group, but this episode certainly highlights her progress as a master troll. Before we go further, though, let's take a moment and talk about the secret that 02 tastes, and what Ikuno probably means by her statement, and also my statement about lilies earlier. Now, I mentioned earlier that the flower of the most common member of Chlorophytum actually looks like a tiny lily. Well, here are some actual lilies if you want to see the resemblance. Do you recognize these lilies? They've actually been on the show before. 3 weeks ago, during my discussion on episode 5, I had a bunch of flowers because it was Valentine's Day, and I was also revealing my grand flowers and keepers and beehive analogies, so it seemed appropriate. These are the flowers here. The lilies are mixed in with the roses, and at this point, they are almost completely closed. Now, one of the things I talked about during this episode was the theory that Ikuno might be into Ichigo, and is either lesbian or bisexual. I listed some of the ways this theory had support, then I said, but I don't want to jump on this for sure just yet. At the time, I was closed to the idea, and now, I'm open to the idea. In an amusing instance of life imitating art, these lilies I've been taking care of have opened up in the same time period that I have opened up to accepting this theory as fact. Why does it matter that these are lilies? Because lilies in Japanese culture are associated with lesbian love, and it's where the yuri genre gets its name. I had actually forgotten that connection, which is dumb of me, since I remember way back thinking how the English translation of the Yuru Yuri anime was a great example of how translations can easily lose their subtext. So, thank you to the people that reminded me of the connection. You see, lilies have shown up before. Last episode, in fact, on Ikuno's bookmark, and on the cover of the book that she holds up next to the object of her affection. And I only noticed when working on this episode, the little book on the bird's cover is a near match to Ichigo's bird in flight hairpin. It's kind of an obvious bit of symbolism in retrospect. But of course, no one suspects this of Ikuno, except maybe Mitsuru. Just like I said that the Chlorophytum flowers seem like secret lilies, Ikuno herself is secretly a lesbian, and it is just this secret that 02 tastes on her. It's also why she doesn't care if the fight continues. She doesn't have the same use for the guys that her fellow pistols will probably have. Luckily for her, 02's antics prevent any follow-up, and while 02 is content to troll and stroll, the girls decided to have that belated conversation about reining her in. The next part begins with 02 telling them that their antics are lame, and that they're just playing around. They don't seem to comment on the lame part, but they want her to know that they're serious, gosh darn it. You can see Kokoro starting to get up the courage to say something, perhaps inspired by Mitsuru from last scene, but she's still not assertive enough to deal with this crew. 02 takes a moment to consider their professed seriousness, and then, does she look right at the audience with this face? I mean, it's full of mischief, like no good can come from that. She decides to join them, and wastes no time stirring the pot. I swear she's looking at us to make sure we're in on the joke. And the boys prove to be as gullible as the girls about 02's intentions, and decide the bath is actually better than the lake. Thus, they disrobe and stride confidently into the waiting and empty bath. Oh, crap. Now, everyone has a shocked expression. This was clearly a mistake. All the guys need to do is back off, close the door, shout apologies, and everything will be... Oh man, these two haven't learned anything. The girls summon unlimited bathworks to attack the guys, who hide behind the open doors instead of closing them. Master strategists, ladies and gentlemen. I sure hope they don't go into battle for a living or anything. Now the boys once again attempt to explain and excuse themselves, and try to deflect blame towards 02. She was the culprit. She was the trickster. Where is she anyway? She can't get away with this. Ah. Crap. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, I died laughing at her caught being sneaky, and then this ridiculous expression she gets on her face before she absconds with their underoos. Even in an episode that has almost nothing to do with her, she finds a way to be the X factor. Now, I said last time that part of the way a beach episode could make sense was that it served as a way to put the parasites around each other in less clothing to heighten the tension between the genders. I liked it better than doing something like a bath scene because it was more subtle, was set up deliberately, and eventually led to some characterization and a sense of progression in the parasites about how they may feel toward each other. This time we actually get a bath scene, but rather than it being titillation or heightening sexual tension, it takes the existing intra-group tension and heightens it. However, like the beach setup, this was intentional too, just for a different reason. We'll talk about that when we get there. Now, Hiro chases after 02, which she rather welcomes, as he's probably no match for her even without his handicap. She toys with him, but this is the guy who pushed himself to death over his initial goal. He isn't going to give up the chase. She, on the other hand, is positively delighted. He finally corners her on the roof, or so he thinks, little understanding that she wields such weapons. She unloads the whole basket on him in what is an oddly dramatic moment. Am I the only one who is reminded of a flock of birds? Can we guess what is meant by 02 tossing away their clothing like this, leaving them all stripped and bare and forced to face the conflict between them? Anyway, the sheer absurdity of it all finally gets to Hiro, and he finds it as amusing as 02 seems to. She is doing her little hands clasped behind her back thing again, and Hiro asks her why she did all this. She wanted to participate in the fight, it seems, and as she didn't care about being seen by him in the beginning, or care about the dividing line, this was her way of having some part of it, some skin in the game. And then she says something a little bit heartbreaking and a little bit endearing. Do I seem a little more human now? Yeah, actually, you really do. Okay, not so much now. I don't think she can help but try to tease him. But, as she herself seems to realize, it is a very humanizing habit of hers. Meanwhile, in the bath, the fight continues. Kokoro is the lone girl not hurling missiles, and Mitsuru is similarly sitting the fight out. Yet both sides continue to hurl words, still apparently debating over who is more wrong. The stalemate is broken by Nana, however, who evidently gets them sorted and lined up in the hall for dressing down. Hachi is there as well, and they chastise the parasites for letting themselves get so worked up, and be in a position where an attack would catch them with their pants down. As they retreat to their respective sides, Nana comments with exasperation, could they be any more unlike the other children? And Hachi is further surprised that 02 decided to join in. Their conversation with Dr. Franxx earlier touched on the squad's atypical nature, but it's really been a pattern for a long time, as we talked about fairly extensively in episodes 5 and 6. Even though these two are once again playing the role of authority, their exasperation and surprise at the situation this episode has been a nice bit of characterization, small as it may be. Separated once more, the girls have surrounded 02, who is reveling in her victory. They demand an explanation, and 02 is surprisingly serious and fatalistic in her response. She says they're on track to end up like the adults, and if they have something they want to say, they better say it soon, because sooner or later they're all going to die. I'm not really sure what she means by ending up like the adults, but as to the rest, I think 02 is well aware that several of them have things they feel but don't say, and the fight with the boys in some ways comes from building frustrations and confusions. This is a different 02 from the one in the elevator who couldn't care less about the fate of her fellow pilots. Thus, 02 somewhat diffuses the anger and turns the girls introspective. At the same time, her partner ends up doing the same for the guys. They are angry at their treatment and getting into trouble to boot, but Hiro admits to having fun. Seeing 02 enjoying herself was enjoyable for him as well. He doesn't understand the girls, sure, but he also hasn't stopped to think about how they feel. Because of his attachment to 02, and his newfound goal of being her wings, he started thinking about how she feels, about how to support her. Mitsuru insists this is unnecessary since she's the ultimate pistol, but Hiro argues that she's a normal girl. Just like the costume differences I pointed out earlier, the group relates to her as a fellow Franxx pilot and sees her from that angle. She fits in from that context, and so her uniform matches theirs as well. But as Mitsuru illustrates, they have not seen her beyond that, have not seen her as a fellow parasite. And to be fair, she hasn't seen them as her fellow pilots for very long either. Hiro, though, having seen 02 in her vulnerable state, understands that her piloting aptitude has nothing to do with her need to fit in, or to feel like a girl, or to feel like a human. Thus, he has started trying to think about how to support her as a person as well as a pilot, and spurred on by this episode's events, he can relate that feeling of needing to support her to the other pistols as well. Finally, he says that he wants to be stronger and take better care of her. Well, on top of everything else, this series has a little bit of coming of age going on, and puberty especially is about girls becoming women and boys becoming men. And I gotta say, in most men, that instinct to be strong and protect is pretty freaking developed. Even Zotome understands it, once you put it that way, and Goro and Futoshi realize that ogling the girls while they're putting their own bodies and well-being on the line is, of course, something they'd hate. Thus, Goro figures out that that means there's only one thing for us to do. It's the thing they should have done way back at the beginning, but they won't get a chance to make it right yet, as we cut to the girls who are processing 02's ominous parting words. Kokoro finally steels herself to speak her mind. She first touches the maternity book, as though gaining strength from the truth it holds, truth about the real nature of things between men and women. Then she speaks with an unusual passion, saying that it can't go on, and that there are things they can't do without the boys, even if she doesn't really understand them. She says what I think is the actual lesson of this episode, that boys and girls are nothing alike, but that's why it's good for us to be together. She starts to give more examples of what the boys are good for, talking about it being born. She doesn't quite say it, but her embarrassment and choice of words, as well as touching the book first, suggests pretty strongly that she now knows enough to realize where babies come from. She's not ready to share that information, and yeah, this probably isn't the best time, but I think she has a glimpse of the bigger picture, like I suspect 02 does. That doesn't mean the fight is meaningless, which we'll talk about in conflicts, but it does give her perspective. Now, Kokoro's speech gives the others pause, especially in the sober atmosphere that 02 left them in, and even Ikuno realizes that they will probably have to make up. Miku, though, is not in the forgiving mood and runs off. Now, the guys are on their way to find the girls anyway, and Zotome is being as stubborn as his partner, but things aren't quite ready to resolve. The two groups meet, and the awkwardness between them is no match for a perceived threat to one of their own. They fan out to search, and the closed rooms from earlier re-enter the story, as Miku has barricaded herself inside one. We see a bunch of those trunks, like the one Naomi had at the beginning, piled up against the door, and one of them is marked with 344 as its code. That's the first hint that something is off about the room. By the way, I went and looked through the opening and didn't see that 344 number anywhere. And the stuffed rabbits on the bed are different from the ones we see that child Ichigo is clutching as well. I was curious, now you don't have to be. Miku decides to actually look around her hiding place, and it's full of what are ominous and sad details. The stuffed animals, the diaries partially used, and a picture of a squad in front of the building. She picks the picture up, and a horror movie soundtrack starts up as realization begins to dawn on her. I actually had this momentary anxiety that it was going to be pictures of this squad, but older, or with some different members, or something else a little bit mind-bending. And that would have been a whole other direction. So I'm kind of glad that didn't happen. Now the others find her and force their way in. It's worth pointing out that Zotome is the one who kicks the door in, full of protective aggression despite himself. And despite initiating Miku's departure, it's Kokoro who rushes to comfort her. Her instinct to nurture is strong, as we've observed. Now, Hiro wonders about the room, and 02 is casually certain that it belonged to the former 13th Squad. As they each grasp the implication, a sobering realization spreads among them. Now, it's not that they didn't know that what they did was dangerous. It's not that they didn't know they could die. Heck, Hiro basically expected to, and Ichigo and Goro already had a moment when they believed that he was dead. But death as an abstract concept is one thing. That's distant, amorphous, a stranger that you haven't met. It's a much different thing to confront the reality of it, the nearness of it. Seeing a room like their own, filled with personal effects, lived in as though the owners might return at any moment, and then knowing that they won't, that they never will. This makes death real for them in a way that nothing in their experience has. And not just their own deaths. Hiro has basically faced that. It's the death of their fellow pilots, the death of all of them at once, wiped out and their memory locked up in rooms like this one. That's the dread they all feel in this moment. And Goro, of course, speaks the truth to them all. They will not escape this fate if they keep fighting this way, if they don't find a way to understand one another. So then, the thing that they should have done from the beginning finally happens. The boys apologize, and the girls forgive. And the one who insisted he wouldn't beg for forgiveness, and the one who insisted she wouldn't forgive, are the very two that start the makeup process. Of course, they put their own stubborn spin on it, and actually manage to be a little flirty by the end. Miku's permission to Zotome that he can look a little, but not too far, is actually something that we should probably sit every teenage boy down and tell him. Girls know you're going to look, and most of them want to turn heads. The trick is, you turn your head, and then you turn it back. Looking is very different from leering. The first can be validating, empowering, confidence boosting. The latter can be threatening and stressful, invasive. More to the point, and relative to our episode, if you make someone uncomfortable, you need to acknowledge and validate that reaction and apologize for it. The height of anger and distress is no time to try to logic your way out of it or worry about who is or isn't at fault. You can come back to it in a place of less emotion if it really matters. But what you can't do is what our Stamens did this time. You can't excuse yourself, you can't tell them that their feelings are invalid, you can't attempt to punish them for their reaction, and you can't attempt to shift the blame somewhere else. Likewise, on the pistol side of things, you can't refuse a dialogue, and you can't try to hang on to your outrage forever. As the saying goes, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Any problem between people that is solvable tends to get solved with communication. And so, the rest of them make up, each in character-consistent fashion. Futoshi begs, and Kokoro wishes he wouldn't. Ichigo and Goro manage to be businesslike about it. And Ikuno and Mitsuru, well, I'm not sure they actually had a problem with each other. The upside to indifference, I guess. Over this, we get a callback to our language of flowers about the lilacs that the former squad had kept for themselves. Our new 13ers replace the dead ones, and we're told that this flower represents friendship and fond memories and youth. Just like last episode with the shooting stars, this leaves us with an upbeat symbol and a sense of hope toward the future. But, just like last episode, the choice of symbol has an underlying transience to it. Yeah, replanting some lilacs is a validation of your own youth and friendship and the fond memories you hope for, but so did the other squad, whose lilacs you found dead with no one to look after them. Now at the end, we briefly see the parasites gearing up for another mission or training or something. Miku and Zorome are already arguing about the delineation between ogling and looking, but this has definitely started the conversation between them of him looking at her in a way that is not neutral. More to come on that, no doubt. Finally, Hiro repeats to Zero 2 the things he told the guys, that he wants to know her more, and so he wants her to speak her mind. Seeing the team make up after communicating is a lesson he did not fail to pick up, and this insistence that they communicate is just part of his newfound priorities involving her. Their differences are enough that they will have problems too if they don't make the effort, but since they complement each other, it's worth that effort. That's really the lesson of this episode. Boys and girls are different from each other, and that's okay. It might even be good. So moving on to goals and conflicts, goals has almost nothing this time, and conflicts isn't much better. Just like last time, the lack of much goal or conflict progression in an episode can give the sense that nothing happened. Actually, quite a lot happened, but goals and conflicts are really the two halves of narrative, and we associate narrative progression with story progression. So when these two don't move very much, we perceive it as the story slowing. But there's a reason they're just 2 out of the 5 elements I talk about. A story with no characterization or world building or theme is a dull and lifeless affair itself. Ideally, every part of a story helps advance all or most of these 5 elements, but it's natural for the concentration of each to vary over a story's course. It actually helps keep it from stagnating, from feeling formulaic. After 2 in a row with lower goal and conflict progression, however, I would expect next time to be another change in pace. So, in goals, The one goal we have sort of progression on is Dr. Franxx's unknown goal. I said last time that it seemed to be advanced by sending the kids to the beach. This time, we learn that it is indeed something he is keeping from Ape, and that letting the parasites flounder in puberty a bit will also advance this goal of his. Now obviously I have my own thoughts on what all this might mean, but for now, all we know for sure is that the events of this episode are things he wants, things he's watching for. Conflicts is similarly sparse, but there is advancement in our team is not a team conflict, like I mentioned at the outset. Getting a lot of frustration and misunderstanding and innate differences out in the open is progress by itself. Stopping to empathize with each other is progress still, and actually making up is a great step forward. This isn't the end, I suspect, as there's still things that are unsaid between various members, but now that we've had this episode, I think I can understand having this as an intermediary step before more of our parasites learn about babies and reproduction, and what just might be expected of them one day. Now we have a few things here in theme. This was definitely some classic World of Children, as they are being left to their own devices and conflict resolution, and the adults are doing it on purpose. They intervene before there is any risk of narrative fallout from it, but the way the characters are developing as people is largely progressing without the input from the adults. They're having to figure this out amongst themselves, which is why it's evolving in the way that it is. The flowers blooming theme from last time, really kind of a similar take, just it's escalating now due to the focus on what makes boys and girls different from each other, and the looming truth that Kokoro has probably uncovered. This is not just about the genders sorting themselves out though, it affects everyone's individual development as well. See, an important part of growing up is figuring out who you are, and a lot of that comes from figuring out how others think and how they are different from you. Learning about others helps you because you figure out who you are not, which is a theme we can lift wholesale from Evangelion if you like. One of the obvious points when this occurs for most people is during puberty, when boys and girls change physically, yes, but they also diverge in personality and mentality. One of the biggest puzzles for a lot of people is trying to figure out what the heck makes the other gender tick. Why do they care about this but not that? Why is their first impulse to do this and not that? How can they so casually say this but struggle to say that? With time, a lot can be figured out, but even well into adulthood, men and women largely have a different thought process and different priorities. Misunderstanding is ubiquitous. Since you always favor the way you yourself think, in fact, you can hardly do otherwise, it's an ongoing struggle to give the same weight to the things they say as you give to your own words. And that's before you get into the infinite permutations of personalities and backgrounds and current mood. Honestly, it's a wonder society doesn't break down all the time. So, while our parasites blossoming into adulthood and the obvious physical progression that implies, our flowers are also growing into the individual people they will become. Our flower metaphors, then, are starting to represent not just sexual maturity, but their growing up and coming of age in general. So we have some structure mirroring again. Both of these last episodes have ended with a character assigning meaning to a symbol and comparing its symbolism to the parasites and their situation. In both cases, there is hope that the concepts referenced will endure. And yet, in both cases, the symbol chosen is one that is transient and impermanent. We'll talk about that a bit more in a sec. We also have an echo with 02 telling Hiro to grab onto her and never let go, which is like Ichigo trying to tell Hiro that she wants to be with him forever. Except in Ichigo's case, he interrupts and doesn't hear or acknowledge it, while with 02, he grasps her hand in agreement. And that, the grasping of hands as they enter the Franxx, is itself an echo back to the very first time they piloted together and she declared him her darling. He wasn't a parasite then, and she wasn't part of the 13th squad, and their change from then to now is reflected in the difference in what each of them is wearing between the two scenes. As I mentioned, we have a little bit of a pattern with the choice of symbols being things that are inherently transient and short-lived. There's the shooting stars from last time, the dead but then replaced lilacs from this time, and then the name of the 13th plantation itself, Karasus, being a reference to cherry blossoms, whose well-established symbolism I discussed at length back in episode 1. All of these together suggest a theme of inevitable and impending mortality. I mean, our 13ers literally replaced the dead lilacs with living ones this time, just as they themselves replaced the previous dead squad with themselves. And yet, the implications of that sort of symbolism don't seem to occur to the parasites. We actually have a lot of examples of symbols or images that should be hopeful or uplifting, but end up having an association with death as well. We've mentioned already the lilacs and the cherry blossoms, from both the plantation name and from 02's original dream image. There's the shooting stars being compared to both hope and the parasites themselves last time, which has an echo in Papa's original speech in episode 1, which more directly suggests mortality. And then there's the original bird metaphors, featuring the two-winged bird that is eventually crushed to death. Now, Hero and 02 overcame the implications of this last metaphor, as the hero that was the two-winged bird died and was reborn as half of the Jinn bird pair that they exist as now. Does this mean that the others can similarly overcome the implications of impermanence in the other symbols? I mean, death as a concept has been getting closer to them recently. They discovered the abandoned dead city last time, and then this time they have to face the death of the squad that came before them. Is replanting the lilacs and reasserting the things it symbolizes analogous to overcoming the dead lilacs they found? Did those symbolize the loss of those things due to their boys versus girls fight? And by making up as they did, have they restored friendship, fond memories, and youth back to life? That's definitely another way to interpret this last use of the language of flowers. Likewise, can Ichigo become an unhidden Ichigo star in Orion, rather than becoming a shooting star that burns bright but burns out? In some ways, we don't know what kind of show we're in enough to guess which of these is implied. Keeping Naomi's fate ambiguous to the audience is starting to look like a stroke of genius, because I still can't say whether or not we're in a show where any or most of our parasites might die, or we're in a show where no one ever leaves the stage and their conflicts never rise to the level of mortality. The last 2 episodes have had reminders about transience and death, which might be a way of foreshadowing that the Reaper is knocking on the door. But it could also be about ramping up the threat of death as a tension to the parasites without actually killing some of them off. I mean, you could make death real to them by having 1 or 2 of them die, and it wouldn't be necessary to have scenes like the end here with the abandoned former squad rooms. This is a situation where in 4 or 5 episodes, we might understand what kind of a show we're in, and looking back at what the lilacs and shooting star represent will be a little more clear. The not knowing, though, is part of what gives each moment its dramatic stakes. So, even though it makes my job harder, the part of me that is an audience member kind of prefers it this way. In What to Watch For, nothing really got answered. We started to see Kokoro mention the maternity book, but that hasn't really happened yet. We didn't get any answer about what Dr. Franxx is up to exactly, or where he's been, and though he's still around and directing things, he doesn't seem to be changing the story yet, or directly influencing anyone. So, yeah, everything stays. I guess we'll add to watch to see how some of the boy-girl relationships change after this episode. Miku and Zorume might change, based on their interactions toward the end. 02 and Hiro continue to advance, that's really obvious. But it's possible that Hiro's admonishment at the end will mean that 02 opens up to him soon, about her own past, or he might do the same to prompt or reciprocate. And I think Kokoro and Mitsuru are going to change too, but I'll hash that out in speculation. Basically, I think the point of an episode like this is to signal a starting point for some of these relationships to progress to the next step. So that's one of the major things we're watching for in character progression from now on. I mentioned earlier that we'll watch to see what the relevance is of the invisible caretakers. It seemed an odd detail to bring up if it's meaningless, so we'll keep watch. We'll be watching to see if there are any hints as to what happened to the previous squad. 02 seems to know at least something about it, as she's brought it up before. It's not really the kind of thing they have to spell out, so if they do, it's probably because something about why it happened will be relevant to our story. Potentially something that the parasites can choose to do differently based on their example. In speculation, we have a similar situation to What to Watch For, with nothing really being confirmed. However, I'm going to go ahead and strike off this one, that Dr. Franxx's goal is kept secret from the Ape Council. We still don't know the goal, and although our guesses appear to be on target so far, but his instructions to Nana and Hachi about not telling the geezers, and about ignoring the normal playbook for puberty are, I think, enough evidence that whatever he's doing, he's keeping it on the down low. So we'll count that as confirmed and remove it. As far as what to add, a lot of what is hinted at in this episode is actually already contained in speculations we've made before. This episode largely suggested we were on the right track without actually confirming anything. Because of this, here's the only thing I really want to add. I mentioned the increased contact between Mitsuru and Kokoro, and that I'd have some speculation on that. I have two separate speculations, actually. One seems more likely than the other, and the second one depends on the first one, so here's what I've got. I think Kokoro and Mitsuru will become a thing, once they both understand about boys and girls and all that. I mentioned this when talking with some of you in the comments last time, but I think Mitsuru is probably the most sensitive out of all the guys. I think his dismissive and occasionally abrasive personality is a reaction to the sensitivity of his, as a defense mechanism. He lashes out and pushes away because he's much more easily harmed than the others. He's keeping people at arm's length for his own sake. Kokoro, meanwhile, is someone who probably would never hurt him. She is sensitive herself and is routinely a peacemaker among the group. And yet, she admires the way he can buck the others, that he has the courage not to toe the line. Even though I think it comes from his own sensitivity, his brashness and occasional disdain might be the kind of danger or threat that she might actually be attracted to, being different from herself. We see her being the one who takes care of some of the plants, so I think we're to infer that she has an especially developed sense of nurturing, of looking after and caring for living things. This is sometimes the appeal of a bad boy for a girl. Aside from the danger or excitement, there is an accompanying desire to fix him or save him with her loving attention. It's a nurturing instinct, basically. Each of them has also been looking after the other in a few ways. Kokoro has asked after him a few times now, most obviously in these two greenhouse scenes, but even though Mitsuru seemed to snap at her during the Lost City sequence last time, when everyone else lost track of her, he was there when the ceiling collapsed. He didn't lose track of her, and bailed her out when she was in danger. He wasn't about to admit to such a thing, and hides his attention by chastising her, not being able to guarantee her safety, but still, her partner didn't know where she was, but Mitsuru did. Speaking of her partner, Futoshi has to be the least developed of all of our characters. He displayed a lack of understanding about Kokoro this time, and, surprise surprise, it's Mitsuru who calls him on it. While he doesn't have any bad personality traits, you can see where he might be a little flat. He's a lot more like Kokoro, and the old adage about opposites attracting doesn't come from nowhere. Meanwhile, Mitsuru and his partner seem to have an understanding about their situation. Like I said, I accept the interpretation now that Ikuno is into girls in general, and Ichigo in particular, and I think Mitsuru is perfectly aware of this. There would be no sense of loyalty from Mitsuru when it comes to going after his own partner only, as he knows there's no tree up which to bark. So yeah, this seems like a perfect storm, and the hapless Futoshi would be the type of victim that could divide the group with conflict. So I speculate that Mitsuru and Kokoro will be a thing, or at least will edge towards it in an increasingly obvious way. The second speculation, then, is that this means Kokoro and Futoshi are doomed. Futoshi, as I already said, is not very well developed, and this might very well be pragmatism. No sense wasting too much time on a character that will not make it. Kokoro has been developed a little bit more, but largely in the last episode or two, or right about the time that it was clear she was paying attention to Mitsuru. This episode reminded the parasites and us that what they do is dangerous, easily fatal, and so I think we are being signaled to prepare for some of our parasites to not make it. So, I'm speculating that if Mitsuru and Kokoro start to be a thing, then Futoshi and Kokoro will be killed or otherwise taken out of the picture at some point. This would do several things. One is that it would emphasize the danger of the world. Killing off characters that are sympathetic and show lots of positive emotions and interactions is a way of letting the audience know that the good guys are not safe. It would hurt a little. The second thing it does is it undermines some of the faith in the system that our parasites have. As we mentioned this time, there's a big difference between the abstract notion of death and the reality of it, the inescapability of it. It's hard to believe everything is fine in your society when that very society is the one that put them in the situation where they were lost. This could shock all of our parasites out of blind faith, but it would particularly impact Mitsuru if this goes as I said in the first part of the speculation. He's already pretty cynical and caustic, but he believes in the party line. He believes in the decisions that the adults have made, even when it means disagreeing with his own squad. So, the third thing this does is characterize Mitsuru. If he and Kokoro grow toward each other, this will shake him up quite a bit. This is really part of why I think this has a chance to happen. We have spent some time watching Mitsuru be characterized and change in the series already. The changes to the main characters have been most obvious, Ichigo and Hiro the most, and 02 is starting to change a little bit now, but almost all of the rest are the same as when we began. Only Mitsuru has had time specifically dedicated to his own shifts and bearing. So, I believe that showing him as a dynamic character will continue. Having him first let down his guard and show the sensitivity that I suspect with Kokoro, only to have that vulnerable side be dealt a huge blow with her death, leading him to change his own outlook on life and society? Well, that is a pretty robust character arc. Can't you just see him being filled with rage at her death, and then later coming to some kind of peace about it, and then taking over her role of caring for the plants in the greenhouse? Finally embracing his own sensitivity and becoming a nurturer in her place? Or alternatively, being so filled with rage and hate at her death, he destroys the greenhouse instead? Anyway, that's what I've got. Their increased contact and the amount of screen time that Mitsuru has gotten, despite being a reactive character, suggests to me that this is a strong candidate for a B-plot amongst our characterizations. The direct relationship between Hiro and 02 is still the main show, and the love polygon that extends to Ichigo and Goro and Ikunu is a parallel A-plot, really, since it continues to inform major decisions that affect the whole group. Adding in more of Mitsuru and Kokoro, especially after this episode, has a certain logic to it that I can't help but speculate about. That's the end, then. After 2 episodes of very little goal and conflict progress, I would expect either something new to enter the game next time, or else major steps on an existing goal or existing conflict. Or maybe we'll have a cultural festival episode, and the parasites can put on a cosplay cafe.